Coming up next on Twitch, this week in computer hardware, Crossfire or a new card, NVIDIA's new anti-aliasing tech explained, amazing mods, new Macs, Llano cares about your DIMMs, cheap Blu-ray burners, something to do with your old PC, 1 terabyte notebook drive, and doubling down on SSDs with Z68. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 129, recorded July 21st, 2011. Don't fold your way into the poorhouse.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or TV instantly. All streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. My name is Patrick Norton, joined as always by the inimitable and today slightly sweaty Ryan Shrout.
We are having quite the heat wave here, although better than normal today. Our air conditioning seems to be keeping up. We closed some vents further down in the office. Sorry about all those people, but it's much cooler in my offices, so that's good.
Everyone stop moving.
Yes, please do. Closing blinds on windows during the middle of the day, that type of thing. Turning off lights. Looked like we were working in a cave for a while, but we got it worked out.
You know it's hot when you start shutting off machines that you never ever shut off, or you start stalking people when they're leaving their desk to make sure they turn their monitor off.
Yes, agreed.
So it has been a crazy kind of last couple days. A whole bunch of stories have come out. We're going to try to hit as many of them as we can. We should probably start out. Do you want to start out with ARM, or do you want to start out with the new FXAA anti-aliasing technology from NVIDIA?
Let's go ahead and talk about that FXAA. This was actually a really good story posted over at Hard OCP. Kyle, who's a friend of both of ours, his website. The author of the actual piece was Mark Warner, editing by Brent Justice, who's their main graphics guy. It's a really, really good article that discusses this kind of new anti-aliasing technology that I don't think many people have even ever heard of, that was developed by NVIDIA, but it's not it's a very different type of technology in this case. If you remember when AMD released I believe it came out in the 5000 series of Radeon graphics cards, they had something called MLAA, morphological anti-aliasing. And this was a GPU compute-based application that basically ran at the very end of the rendering stage. So right before the image was pasted on the screen, so to speak, this MLAA filter would run over it, and it would it would search for edges, it would look for things where it could make things straighter, maybe a little bit, just fix all the aliasing and those types of things that anti-aliasing attempts to do anyway. And what was interesting about this is you could use this in addition to standard anti-aliasing. It was direct compute based, which was kind of like the first instance of that happening really on a graphics card. So this was another way. It was like, hey, GPU computing, it's not exactly rendering, it's actually just doing image analysis. It's not doing any kind of 3D graphics rendering in this traditional sense. FXAA, which stands for Fast Approximate Anti-Aliasing, is similar in some ways because it doesn't it's not your traditional anti-aliasing methods. This kind of works like MLAA, but it actually happens inside the game engine. It is a single pass pixel shader, so it's not direct compute based. It is actually a pixel shader that runs, and there's 3 different versions of it, but really only one that matters for this discussion, talking about PC games. And it works on NVIDIA hardware, it works on AMD hardware. The caveat is that it has to be implemented by the game developer. So currently there are only 2 games released that implement this, Fear 3 and Duke Nukem Forever. There are a lot of advantages to this. However, it's apparently much faster, much better performing than standard aliasing methods. It can address certain things that anti-aliasing cannot address. For instance, if you've ever been annoyed by pixels on your screen that tend to flicker or flash as you move towards or away from them side to side, a lot of times what that is an issue with an item or a portion of an item that's being rendered that is less than 1 pixel in size. So the resolution of your screen is 1920 by 1200 or whatever. If there's part of an item that's less than 1 pixel, and anti-aliasing attempts to correct that, it'll either usually correct it to off or on, and so depending on your angles and how you move to it, you get this kind of annoying flicker. The FXAA has logic built in to prevent those types of things. The performance article over at Hard ICPs actually does a pretty good job of explaining what it is. They look at performance results, comparing it on NVIDIA cards, AMD cards, and even image quality comparisons side by side. And if we look at the performance of it, what I think stands out the most is, especially at these super high resolutions like 2560 by 1600 on a 30-inch panel, even down to 1920 by 1200, you're seeing differences of 51% between FXAA and 4XAA, like your 4X traditional anti-aliasing. So FX being this new iteration and 4X being the standard, what we're all kind of used to going into the control panel enabling or going into the game settings enabling 4X anti-aliasing. In this particular portion of their test, they were looking at Fear 3, 19 by 12, a pretty standard resolution, GTX 570, a fairly standard enthusiast class graphics card, and with FXAA they're averaging 82 frames a second, and that dropped all the way down to 39 frames a second with 4XAA enabled. So
wow.
That's, you're talking about 51.6% performance difference there for image quality that if you look at those pages of the story are, I think they'd still consider 4XAA to probably be maybe better, hit or miss depending on different instances. Sometimes FXAA was better because it could handle things like those individual single pixel bugs. It could handle things like transparency very well, as opposed to standard anti-aliasing has to go through all kinds of tricks to handle. Like if you're looking through a fence or something like that where there's a lot of transparency in a texture, that's very difficult for standard anti-aliasing to do. This seemed to do a better job of that, and if you look through some of their screenshots, you'll see that as well.
It seems like this, if it's not too difficult for developers to implement, it's something that's going to be a natural, except that maybe, it's kind of funny because this is an amazing piece of technology. If it's not too difficult to implement, and it comes right about the time the entire console market seems like it's about to go AMD.
Right. What's it's interesting. NVIDIA wrote this technology, the FXAA, but it does work on AMD cards.
Oh, good. Okay.
It does work on AMD cards. Now, there's always going to be that nagging thought in the back of your head that, NVIDIA wrote this code, so unless people really get a hold of it, these developers really make sure this is the case, it might prefer one card versus the other. It doesn't necessarily appear to be the case. The Hard OCP article actually looked at the GTX 570 and the Radeon HD 6970, and they saw similar performance gains of about 50% at 1920 by 1200. So that's pretty good. So if you look at the image quality comparisons, it's much better than 2XAA and comparable to 4XAA. It seems like a pretty good win. And as the author of this piece kind of points out, this does seem more like the future of image quality improvements. The disadvantage of this is that the developer has to be involved. They have to know from the outset. They have to be able to, they want to implement this and kind of tweak it. The advantages of standard anti-aliasing and even AMD's MLAA is that they can be applied to games that already exist. They can be applied without the developer's knowledge, right? So this is kind of like after the fact improvement as opposed to having to develop for it initially. So it really depends on how much time the developer wants to spend on this type of thing, how adamant they are about getting the perfect image quality for that. But because of its performance advantages, I wouldn't be surprised to see this type of technology implemented on, as you mentioned, next generation consoles, and thus I think we would see wide-scale adoption across PC gaming and console gaming.
We should probably talk about Intel and AMD be warned. It's up on PCPer.com. ARM could grab 20% of the laptop market in the next 4 years. ARM, of course, being the little tiny light processors that sip energy that have been taking names and kicking ass in the tablet market.
Right.
Apple's the Apple processors, the A5 is actually an ARM design with some of their own. Basically, Apple bought a company that speeds up ARM processors, and that became the sort of CPU division of Apple for the iPad and iPhone and probably any other portable device they want to do. And Windows 8 will be supporting ARM processors, and those who ignore Microsoft's announcement that Windows 8 will support ARM processors will perhaps take note of iSupply's claim that ARM could grab 1 in 5 of the laptops sold by 2015. Basically, because the system on a chip is extremely low power. They're talking about having console-level graphics in 18 months. Yeah, console-level graphics quality from their next generation of chips in 18 months. The next generation of power efficiency research, which should be, quote, well below what Intel and AMD will be trying to reach. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years for notebook development, especially as tablets are coming out and people try to decide. It's funny, on Textilla, we've got Veronica's got one of the Toshiba Thrives, and she's comparing that to her iPad, and she's going to talk about, I was like, come on, try to travel without your notebook and do everything on the tablets, and she was looking at me like, right. She's like, no, can't has. Do it for science, Veronica. She's like, no. But it's an interesting idea, right? Because it comes from an Inquirer article. They're talking about iSupply, but that's a pretty wild concept. That x86 processors, of course, thanks to Sasha Sagan over at PC Mag, my favorite cell phone reviewer, I'm kind of on an anti-hype, anti-sort of, what do they call it? The AOL way, where you move a bunch of garbage by writing really brilliant titles. Right. I admire the title writing. It's just the article behind it is often kind of suspect. But it's sure. This is a forecast. This is looking at 2015. This is only talking about 1/5 of the x86 market. So who knows what it could be? But it's an interesting idea, especially with Windows 8 and iOS, that ARM CPUs and small portable devices could be the next thing. What's going on with Intel Sandy Bridge eProcessors? I mean, it's kind of funny, right? I'm sorry. I was going to say, by the way, Apple made $7 billion last quarter, mostly on iPhones and stuff, and the notebooks, which they all revved, and we'll talk about that. All the hardware they revved, and Intel made $13 billion. That's like oil company money. So everybody's making money hand over fist, but it seems like the Sandy Bridge eProcessors might be shipping by Christmas.
So originally they were supposed to ship in January, February of next year. It looks like they might be moving in, which is good news for high performance computing, enthusiast level computing, those types of things. But the interesting part was that the rumor is the X79 chipset that we've talked about quite a bit here would both support the Socket 2011 quad channel processors as well as the LGA 1366 current existing processors. We've talked about it in those regards, but the issue is now that the X79 chipset may in fact no longer support or may not support PCI Express 3.0, even though that was a feature that people thought were going to be implemented, and that they were still going to use the current configuration on the chipset and that type of stuff, with 2 SATA 6 gigabit per second ports and 4 SATA 3 gigabit per second ports. So the current configuration of storage technology, as opposed to improving on that and making them all SATA 6G or something like that. So that's kind of like the rumor is, right? So PCI Express 3.0 probably should be in these next generation chipsets, but obviously Intel found. They said that they had trouble testing their engineering silicon with PCIe 3.0 cards and is not confident enough to integrate it into their production chips at this time. Due to the lack of widely available PCIe 3.0 add-in cards, which is also true. The only thing that might take advantage of that in the near future would be the SSDs, the PCI Express-based solid-state drives. So we'll see how that implementation works. But it is kind of interesting to think that AMD's platform, even though many regard it as the inferior of the two that exist currently, has full support for 6 SATA 6 gigabit per second ports on its controller. They haven't had any issues with it. They haven't, obviously Intel had the recall on the 3.0 gigabit per second ports back in January. AMD doesn't have any of those issues either. So this is kind of more of a slight step back for Intel's platform division, but we'll actually see how much that matters in terms of sales and cost and actual end user performance when those processors may or may not be released before Christmas.
Well, they're already pretty darn fast and already pretty much own the market. Western Digital now has a 1 terabyte hard drive in a 9.5 millimeter form factor. So if you've been looking for the stupid video storage on your notebook, Western Digital wants your business on the new WD Scorpio Blue. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. 500 gigabyte per platter aerial density, so it's a 2-disc, 2-platter, 2-disc drive in 9.5 millimeters and a 2.5 inch drive. The number of platters isn't that impressive. The aerial density is pretty ridiculous. And they're looking like, so secure parks in there, shock guard, the normal stuff with parking the head. And where is it? Suggested retail price of $139. Think about that. What did you pay for your last non-SSD?
Right.
I paid $100 for a 320 gigabyte drive about a year and a half ago. So Daddy's getting a new hard drive. If you're curious, by the way, another article that I was actually really enjoying, and I'm going to have to reread a second time. This is linked up on PCPro.com. Chris Blizzard from Mozilla blogged about multi-process. And I love some of the stuff because he talks about gaming and what's kind of going on in the bigger picture when you're talking about programming. And it's I just love this paragraph. One side effect of splitting a program up into multiple processes is that instructions do not inherently have a specific order. One of the most evident places for that to occur is during a video game. I am sure most gamers have played a game where the controls just felt sluggish and muddy for some inexplicable reason. While there could be a few problems, one likely cause is that your input is not evaluated for a perceivably large amount of time. Chris Blizzard of Mozilla took this and other issues with multi-threaded applications and wrapped it around the concept of Firefox past, present, and future. And there's some really interesting stuff in there. If you're curious about learning more about how software and hardware interacts, you hear us talking about threads and cores and multi-threaded applications and how they're all working. This is a great delete expletive read. I highly recommend it. It's worth your time. And it's also, sometimes the idea of 100 milliseconds of lag can take place between, instructions that might ideally be consecutive but get out of order in the way that multiprocess handles them. Go read it if you're curious. That one's going to be
this same topic, the same theme applies to a lot of other things. If you've heard of the term micro-stutter in terms of gaming performance, in particular multi-GPU gaming, if you have SLI or Crossfire, a lot of people will tell you they can feel micro-stutter in gaming, but they don't really know where it comes from. Not many people understand how it exists. You can judge your frame rate and you're not seeing fluctuations that you might expect to see with micro-stutter. It has a lot to do with frame input times, latencies between frames, variability between latencies between frames as opposed to longer or shorter ones. It's the change in the distance between frames, and obviously that comes into mouse keyboard input as well. It's discontinuity between when you move your mouse from when things actually happen on screen, and it could be because of skipping frames, because you have more computing horsepower than you actually need. So in terms of you're limiting to 160 or 60 or 120 frames per second, depending on your display configuration. A lot of these types of things going on. I expect, based on what I'm hearing, that there's going to be some interesting discussion in the next 60 days or so about GPU microstutter, how it exists, or why it exists, how it can be fixed, and how to maybe kind of teach people to perceive it, which could be kind of a negative to go into as well.
I'm laughing because when I learned what certain digital, bad digital artifacts look like, I can no longer watch certain movies without seeing them and being irritated by them.
Yeah, that's kind of annoying.
I might try to avoid learning too much about micro-stutter.
I can completely understand that. One of the cards that might not have a lot of micro-stutter is the new MSI N580 GTX Lightning graphics card that apparently, according to the press release from MSI, broke some gaming records, some overclocking records in 3D Mark 11, 3D Mark Vantage, and the Unigine Heaven DX11 benchmarks. So let's see. They had, I guess the specific numbers aren't going to mean a lot if you don't have a reference for this. But if you look at a 3D Mark 11, 3D Mark Vantage score of 46,546. If you have any idea what the norms are for that, you realize how extravagantly that is. I believe these are SLI configurations, highly overclocked with LN2 of course. I mean, otherwise, why bother, right? So that's pretty impressive stuff. And the Lightning Edition graphics card from MSI is one that they have tweaked, especially for these types of events, overclocking, overvolting. Not for your everyday consumer in terms of putting LN2 on them necessarily, but if you're looking for a card maybe that has that kind of flexibility, and this is the way to go. So good on them, I guess, for that. Now, you had a post here about a Z68 motherboard that you found pretty interesting.
Yeah, Zotac, actually. Zotac, I think of them as making Atom motherboards, real tiny motherboards, low power consumption, low heat for home theater PCs and stuff. They have a Z68 chipset in a ridiculously small form factor. It's actually a really attractive, not as attractive as the motherboard we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, but Zotac recently announced those mini ITX Z68 motherboard sporting standard desktop parts for expansion, including an X16 slot, 4 SATA ports, 8 USB 2.0 ports, a pair of USB 3.0 ports, and a big old stack of audio and video output ports. And if I'm not mistaken, dual or triple antennas for Wi-Fi N on that. I want to build that into a small box. Should we talk about Llano? I'm always excited about building small PCs in strange configurations, but it's kind of funny. So Llano cares about your DIMMs and some overclockers, getting their liquid nitrogen mayhem on.
Yeah.
You said a PC person as Akiba have managed to push the AMD Llano A8 3850 to its limits. It's kind of funny. This is like feral nerdery. A Super Pi 32M score of 14 minutes and 17.5 seconds at an impressive 4.75 gigahertz.
Yeah, so they got it up to as high as 4.9 gigahertz, but wouldn't finish their benchmark to do that. So they were very close to the 5 gigahertz mark, but 4.75 gigahertz, and then they were able to meet the Super Hyper Pi or Super Pi 32 million transaction. So that's kind of cool. No pun intended, I guess, that they were able to do that with the LN2. The other bit of news, the other bit of information was a story over at Legit Reviews that we posted about at PC Per that talked about Llano does care about your DIMMs. And in fact, having 4 DIMMs in your system is actually better for performance than having 2 DIMMs, which kind of is counterintuitive for what we may have been thinking of in the past.
Well, especially with the 3 sticks of memory stuff, we found out it was better to have 12 gigs on 3 sticks than 2 sets of 6 2-gig or 6 2-gig sticks, 3 4-gig sticks. In any case, usually it seems like in the past, as long as using fewer slots was better, at least on some of the Intel motherboards. I'm going to go back to keeping my mouth shut and not being eloquent in silence.
No. I mean, so the memory controller on Llano is very different than what we have seen in the past. We talked about here on Twitch about how improving memory speed, going from 1333 megahertz to 1600 to 1866, drastically changed integrated gaming performance, was something that has not happened before. We talked about how that, and obviously because of the way the integrated graphics on Llano works with the memory controller, it's very different than what has happened on chipset-based integrated graphics and even on Intel's own processor-based graphics solutions. And it turns out that not only does it benefit from higher speeds, it benefits from the additional DIMMs. Even though bandwidth isn't really increasing, you're still talking about 128-bit memory controller. We're not increasing that, but the extra DIMMs might actually give you a little bit of an edge in terms of performance. So if all else being equal, getting 4 2-gigabyte DIMMs might make more sense than getting 2 4-gigabyte DIMMs for this particular platform.
That would also be less expensive, probably.
Yeah, it tends to be. I mean, I think getting the 4 2 gigs would probably be less expensive. Obviously, you're keeping yourself out from upgrading easily down the road, but if you're comfortable with 8 gigs of memory for the next foreseeable platform upgrade, I think you should be okay. So,
and you saw some pretty amazing PC case mods at PDX-LAN. The pictures. Show the pictures.
The one that impresses me the most, and we kind of went over this one yesterday, was this Lego built one from a guy named Nightmare, Nitemayr. And if you look at the inside of it, it's like much of it is just decorative, but there's Legos all over the place. Like the power supply is blocked in by Legos. There are Lego guys inside working. Looks like, like they're working in a factory type of thing. The crane on the outside of the case is actually fully functional and controllable by software on the PC. It was very, very cool how it all built. My favorite part, I wish I'd gotten a video of it up close, is the hard drive LED on the front was actually installed into the into one of the little Lego guys' guns on the front, so it looks like he's welding. So that as the LED light for the hard drive flickers, it looks like he's welding on the front of the case. It's very creatively done.
That's very awesome.
Cool. Yeah, it was pretty neat. There were some other good ones there. Ones that use a Dan Aykroyd's vodka, I think that's what it is, right? The Skull branded vodka there. They had some of that. There was another one that I didn't actually post a picture of that I found today. I was going through some photos that looked like a Tron bike as well. Oh, wow. There was some pretty cool stuff there. If you're interested in that, either come to QuakeCon next month or pay attention to the PCPro.com site. I'm sure we'll have lots of photos of all of the case mods that we come across at QuakeCon next month in Dallas. So that's pretty cool. Now, something else that was modded, you pointed out, I hadn't seen this before. This was a motherboard that was like airbrushed. I didn't know we did that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So the Hard OCP, Kyle Screw found this one. It's a custom painted motherboard, and they were commenting on some of the opportunities with some of the new motherboard layouts for customizing them. And literally, this is until those moments where you're looking at 4-point type and your eyes try to fall out of your face. The Asus Maximus 4 Extreme is Z68, which, if memory serves, is an enormously expensive motherboard. But it's the idea of once again, just when you think, case mods have been taken to a ridiculous extreme, somebody goes inside the case and starts, you know what I mean? It's kind of like when you go to the right kind of car show and you realize that somebody spent 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars taking a car apart and basically making sure parts of the car that no one will ever see unless they're like servicing the transmission, what it looks like on the inside. So that's the Asus Maximus 4 Extreme.
Actually, no, I think the actual motherboard you're reading what the in the signature.
I'm reading a SIG and not the actual motherboard.
Yeah, I think this is a Asus Sabertooth motherboard. I believe this is the only one they made like this that kind of had a sheath that goes over the motherboard PCB itself. So the only thing that's revealed from it are the DIMM slots, the CPU slot, socket, and the PCI Express slots and that type of thing, and it kind of covers everything else. It's very cool.
A shrouded motherboard, as it were.
Yeah. I don't think they're doing that anymore. I think they had some maybe negative feedback about issues, just difficult to access certain things, and then the added cost of this type of deal. I hope they maybe airbrush this with some like UV reactive paint or something like that, because that would make a pretty cool case modded motherboard as well.
Skulls aren't enough for Ryan Shrout. Ryan Shrout needs skulls that glow in the dark.
Exactly. I think we could all use skulls that glow in the dark on your motherboard. Actually, the Intel branded, was it X58? No, Z68? I don't know, one of those motherboards. Actually, the hard drive indicator light on the PCB is in the shape of a skull because of their legacy of the Skull Trail brand type of thing. It was actually very cool, but the case it was in didn't have a window, so it was kind of wasted on that. But oh well.
Our second to last news story. People keep asking us about cases to stuff more drives into. Check out Spire, not the U.S. notebook backpack company, but the Netherlands supplier of enclosures. Is the new? They're basically their new tower PC case, the Epoxy Rev 2, which is shockingly understated for a PC case, and will support up to 5 5.25 inch, and 6 3.5 inch drive bays, all toolless, and 6 120 millimeter fans in case you miss 1999 and want your computer to sound like a jet engine when you're gaming.
Oh goodness.
I do like that. I'm looking at that and I'm thinking like the Rip Monster 3000 could be even more out of control. It could. A lot of drive bays. New Apple hardware?
Yeah, a lot of it too.
Well, Mac Mini, Core i7, Core i5, which is actually I was thinking MacBook Air came out days ago. It seems like with Lion's out. I don't know if you heard our beloved producer experiencing the trauma of Lion seasickness while trying to get things running.
So I don't think a lot of people are like super excited about Lion necessarily, but the new Mac hardware will basically give you an overview of what it is. MacBook Air probably what people are most interested in. Now it has Sandy Bridge based Core i5 and Core i7 processors, ultra low voltage based parts, starting at $999 for the 64 gig solid state version with 2 gigs of memory and 1.6 gigahertz Core i5, and then they go up to the $1,599 model, which is a 256 gig SSD, 4 gigs of memory, and a 1.7 gigahertz Core i5 processor. And they do have an option for a Core i7 1.8 gigahertz. So I think the Core i7 will support hyper-threading. The Core i5 will not in these configurations still. So there could be a noticeable performance difference in CPU-based tasks on those machines, and they're still claiming up to 7 hours of battery life on the 13-inch model. So
they're working pretty hard to sort of differentiate the models by crippling processors, not to sound really cranky about it. They don't want to cannibalize the big sales at the higher end.
Right. You did mention the Mac Mini gets the same type of upgrades, basically, although I think they do use Radeon discrete graphics on this. Probably one of the more interesting ones, the new 27-inch Cinema display actually has all those machines, by the way, had Thunderbolt built in. So does this 27-inch monitor. It is a Thunderbolt display. It'll have pass-through, so you can have multiples of these displays hooked up. Has a HD camera and built-in speakers, which I believe this is like, is it the first Apple monitor that's not also a PC that has speakers built in? I think it might be.
I haven't. At this point, I'm still kind of shocked that if I'm reading this correct, it's $999 for a 27-inch 2560 by 1440 monitor that also happens to have a pretty badass computer built into it, and they're delivering FireWire on that. So it's snarky as I'm being about Apple segmenting notebook CPUs to kind of sort of make you.
Well, this isn't a machine, is it?
Oh, it is a Thunderbolt display.
This is just a display.
Oh, okay.
So, but it uses Thunderbolt connectivity, so then you can attach other monitors to it as well. So, like, you could plug this into your MacBook Air or your MacBook Pro or your Mac Mini, right? And this could be your secondary display, and you can connect other ones. You can do the daisy changing off of it. It also has gigabit Ethernet, 3 USB 2.0 ports, and a MagSafe charging connection for your laptop.
That's actually what got me completely confused, because I saw the list of like all of these strange and wondrous things like FireWire 800 and assumed it was a iMac.
Yeah, so that's still pretty cool. It is very expensive. $1,000 for a 27-inch display is still up
actually there. Yeah, that's not cheap.
But you can daisy chain up to 6 of them. So if you want to spend $6,000, you can do that. Not saying you should.
I'm sorry, I'm sitting there, I'm like, that's more than I paid for my truck, man.
Yeah, well, gotta step up, Patrick.
I just stepped up.
All right.
We will say goodbye to news and move on to the questions right after we take a moment to thank our beloved sponsor, Netflix. I am a member.
Right.
Ryan is a member. Are you a member yet?
You should be. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. Netflix, if you're not familiar with them, where have you been on the internet all this time? They stream thousands of TV episodes and movies directly to you instantly, which means you save time, money, and hassle, which I think are all good things. There are several easy ways to instantly access streaming movies and TV shows with Netflix. You can watch Netflix movies and TV shows on your PC, Mac, or iPad with the new iPad app, which is cool. You can watch Android phones too. Check for availability on that. I think they just announced a handful more today, so that's good news. If you have a gaming console, an Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, or even a Nintendo Wii, you can watch Netflix right on your TV as well. If you're not a gamer, you can still watch Netflix on your TV with an Apple TV box, Roku box. They're inexpensive, pretty easy to use. Also check for Blu-ray players, TVs that have this type of functionality built in. I think you'll be able to find Netflix basically anywhere you want to be. So keep an eye out. You might even have a device that already supports this and not even know it. With Netflix, you can watch movies and TV shows instantly using any of those devices. You can begin watching a movie or show on one device, then finish it on a different one, which is really nice. If you're watching something downstairs on your Xbox 360, you're going to go upstairs and go to bed, you can bring your laptop with you, finish it up there, and not have to worry about missing a beat. Whichever way you choose to access Netflix, you can watch as many movies and TV shows as you want, anytime you want. And you can cancel at any time if you don't like the service, but I don't think you're going to fall into that category. Try Netflix today, 30 days free. Go to netflix.com/twit, TWIT, and if you make sure you use that URL when you sign up for the free trial, netflix.com/twit. We thank Netflix for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. We hope you enjoy watching instantly with Netflix. What do you say we jump into some emails?
Crossfire or a new card, dear Ryan and Patrick. First off, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to provide us with an awesome and informative podcast. It has reignited my interest in computer hardware in a big way. Best thing I've heard all day. RX Killer, that's who's emailing in, built a system, a sort of his own version of the Rip Monster 3000 I built. He says, the main question I have, although my motherboard has 2 physical PCI Express 2.0 X16 slots, installing another card and enabling Crossfire will cap both cards at a max of X4. So he's kind of okay with his current graphics situation. He's got a Radeon HD 5770, reference card running at stock speeds. He's playing Portal 1, Portal 2, GTA 4, and the Grid, but he wants more. So do I buy, he asks, another AC 5770 and deal with them running at X4 speeds, or should I just get a new GPU altogether? I really don't want to spend a lot of money, but I don't know which would be more cost effective. A new AC 5770 is about $120, give or take a few dollars, but I wouldn't mind spending a maximum of $200 if it will yield much better performance. What do you guys think? I don't care about brands, NVIDIA or AMD, but there are so many choices it makes my head hurt. Believe me, sometimes it makes even Ryan's head hurt. On a side note, if I go the Crossfire route, would I need to upgrade my power supply? Thanks, RX Killer. So
I had to look up this motherboard because I was confused when he said that they would be running at by 4. You know, my initial thought was, no, I think he's wrong. I think it'll actually run at by 8 for both cards. But I looked, and this particular motherboard does specify that you get one at by 16, and there's the other by 16 slot that is running at 4x. So it's obviously coming off of the chipset, not the processor itself, because this is a Core i7 1156 based platform. For whatever reason, this motherboard doesn't have official support for Crossfire SLI, which could be a negative. So, and actually, that's a good, Crossfire it will support, so you'd be able to do multi-GPU with that. I still think with a by 4 connection, you will see significant scaling opportunities with the 5770. That is what graphics card he said he had, right? The 5770, yeah. I don't think moving... You'll actually have one at by 16 and one at by 4, according to the configuration page that I'm looking at, not both at by 4. Regardless, you're still going to have one that may have a potential bottleneck. I don't think it will be an issue at these type of performance level of graphics cards. So if you're comfortable with that kind of $100 to $120 investment, you can get a 5770, and I think you will be probably as good as a performance as you can get for that type of investment. He says he's willing to spend up to $200. I was looking around at kind of these $200 class graphics cards. It looks like you can get a Radeon 6850 for, yeah, okay, you actually get those for like $160, $170. And I think that's probably going to be a significant performance improvement over his 5770. So that I would probably go that route rather than spend $120 on another 5770, have potentially questionable scaling results. Spend $40 or $50 more than that. You don't have to go up to that full $200 if you don't want to, and get a card that you know is going to be much better performing than the 5770, and you don't have to worry about any potential issues with the multi-GPU configuration on your motherboard. That's kind of the route I would go with that. Let's see, we got another email here about the OCZ Agility 3 disappearing from the BIOS. It says, Ryan, I was wondering if you have heard anything about OCZ Agility 3 SSDs disappearing from the BIOS. Using one in an Asus M4A8 7TD EWVO. I think it just means EVO there. I don't know what an EWVO is. With 8 gigs of RAM, Windows 7 by x64 system, and received a BSOD, and now the drive does not show up in the BIOS, which prevents checking the firmware on it. If this drive has to be RMA'd, and I am in Canada, I was wondering if there's a better SSD to use general purpose under Windows 7. We've gotten a couple of these complaints in, both to myself and Alan. I don't know if anybody else has really seen anything like this, Patrick, but Alan did some research into this and found that what appeared this was kind of a potential known issue for this kind of generation of SSDs. A firmware fix did apparently fix this. The problem is if you didn't know about the problem and you didn't update your firmware beforehand, if you get to this point where it's not showing up in the BIOS, yes, you are going to have to RMA it. If you're going to RMA it, they're not going to give you your money back. I would just go ahead and use the new one that they give you. It will be firmware, with the latest firmware on it. I don't think you're going to have any problems. If you are just, you don't care, you want to spend something else, look at the Intel 320s or the 510s. Those are all good SSDs. If you need SATA 6 gigabit per second speeds, you can do that as well. Corsair has their new Force series, Force Series 3, I believe is what they're called, kind of based on the same controller, but they don't use custom firmware and that kind of stuff. They're using the stock firmware from Sandforce and that kind of stuff as well. So you probably wouldn't have any of those issues with those brands of SSDs. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So, nope. Can't hear you.
Sorry about that. In 3, 2. Horse writes in, he's looking for a Blu-ray reader and writer for under $100. Are there any that we would recommend? Well, here's the thing. Newegg lists a whopping total of 15 Blu-ray burners. 11 of them cost between $100 and $200. The rest are $99, except for LG's WH12LS30, which is an OEM, basically a stripped-down box. It means there's probably no software in their OEM version for $79.99. To put that into context, though, they only offered 12 Blu-ray drives, period, from $56 to $160. The $160 drive is a Sony slot loader designed for notebooks, or since I seem to be obsessed with small form factor home theater PCs, it would be wonderful for a home theater PC. Most of them sell for well under $100. So getting back to readers and writers to burners, almost all of these drives, whether they are under $100 or almost $200, support 12x burning. One of the $170 models only supports 6x burning. I'm pretty sure you're okay with the $79 LG or the $99 Sony or the $99 Lite-On or the $99 Asus. These things are pretty close to a commodity at this point. I would tend to roll with the Lite-On because I've been using Lite-On optical drives pretty heavily in the last 3-4 years and have had zero complaints. They're kind of like my new Plex store. Don't tell anybody at Plex store I said that. They'll hunt me with a stick. Or, hey, you know what? If you want to save $20 and pay for a couple months of Netflix or buy a new Blu-ray, go with the LG version because LG makes a whole lot of very nice Blu-ray players, and I'm sure their Blu-ray drive is just fine. But, yeah, any of those drives should take care of you, Mr. Horse.
All right. We have another email here asking about SSDs and the Z68 platform. Lauren, how would you pronounce that, Patrick? Lauren Nishu?
Let's go with Lauren Shu. Or
That's
Laurentio.
good.
And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it.
Yes, we both do. Okay, so I understand that you can gain some get some performance improvements if you use a Z68 plus SSD motherboard while using a spindle drive. But what happens when you use another SSD instead of a hard disk? Will there be speed improvements if the 2.5-inch SSD you have is slower than the onboard one? What happens if you have a faster 2.5-inch one than the MSATA cache? Furthermore, does the Z68 chipset or a later iteration that might be planned support using any SSD using any SSD as a cache? Do you need the SSD to be MSATA? Is there an adapter from MSATA to regular size SATA? Does it really have to be that port, or can you use a regular SATA port? Or can you use a PCI Express SSD? So there's a lot of questions there. No, so he's talking about the motherboards that have the integrated micro-SATA port on them. I believe there's one from Gigabyte. They sell it both with an SSD and without an SSD. You don't have to use that. The technology is Intel SRT, Smart Response Technology, I think is what it's called. And this can be used with any SSD, a 2.5-inch drive, with the mSATA format there. Anything you want to do, you can actually use it with that. So no, you don't have to buy this motherboard with the mSATA port, although you can, and it's kind of a cool feature that it's always there. You don't have to worry about taking up any space in your case, that kind of thing. But you can use any SSD as long as I think the minimum size has to be 20 gigs, I believe, maybe 16 gigs, something like that. So there's one question. He asks about what happens if you use another SSD instead of the hard disk. I wouldn't bother doing that. There's no point in having an SSD as a cache for another SSD. The performance deltas between these, the performance deltas between these SSDs are not that dramatic at this point. And I think in terms of how expensive SSDs are and cost per gigabyte, you're kind of wasting a lot of value there. Don't do that either. My recommendations are always make your SATA drive your boot drive and have a secondary drive for storage and backup and that kind of stuff. Or get a spindle-based drive, use this cache option, the Intel SRT technology, and use that to speed up the capability without having the kind of the potential hassle of multiple drive letters and moving things around, that type of thing.
It's so funny because the SSDs are so fast. Like because part of why I was looking at this was like, oh, you could use the mSATA as a scratch drive. You know, that way it wasn't occupying the SSD with the scratch drive activity. And it's like the pipe is so big and the data's moving so fast, it really doesn't make a difference. Which is kind of awesome and kind of sad.
Right.
Then you got to start wondering what you're going to do to speed up your performance in terms of your reads and writes.
It's if you have an SSD in your system already, don't worry about the caching stuff. If you're one of those people that I know a lot of them that don't like the idea of having a 60 gig base drive and a 2 terabyte regular drive and having to manage all this type of stuff. How many games can I put on the SSD? Versus, how many can I put on the 2 terabyte drive? How do I move them back and forth? If I want to do that, I don't want to uninstall Team Fortress 2, but I want to install StarCraft 2, those types of things. The SRT technology kind of alleviates you of that and giving you some of the performance advantages of having a solid-state drive. He mentions PCI Express-based SSDs. You can use a PCI Express-based SSD. No, I take that back. You cannot use a PCI Express-based SSD as a cache. It has to go through a SATA interface, whether that be a standard SATA cable or the mSATA connection on that Gigabyte motherboard. So you can't do that. Although OCZ did show at Computex in June a combination PCI Express SSD with a 2.5-inch spindle-based drive on it. So like you would have a 500 gig or a 1 terabyte spindle-based drive installed on this PCI Express-based SSD that you plug in as one whole unit. And it has its own caching technology. It doesn't use Intel's technology. We haven't seen those yet in terms of testing and reviews or availability, but those are going to be an option down the road as well. I think the Intel SRT technology is very simple to set up. It's very easy to use. It seems pretty fail-safe in terms of the SSD dies. You still have your hard drive. If the hard drive dies, then you have a dead hard drive, right? So nothing really changes there. But if you're interested in that technology, I mean, that Gigabyte motherboard with the SSD integrated was a really good deal. At least when we talked about it like in June or July, you were getting a $100 SSD for about $65 or something like that if you kind of looked at the way the motherboard costs ran. So I wouldn't be against that option. It's something to look into if you're very interested in Intel SRT stuff.
One last question before we go. Old computers, what can I do with them? I have a bunch of old computers lying around, and I have no idea what to do with them. I just did a count up, and I have about 12 systems lying around, and I have the chance to get some more. They all have P4 2.8 gigahertz processors, memory ranging from 512 megabytes to 1 gig, and hard disk space ranging from 40 to 80 gigs. I've been told I should make a folding farm, but I have no idea what that is. My idea was to hook them all up to do parallel computing for video transcoding using Handbrake or something similar. Is this possible to do? Thank you for your time. By the way, thanks for the great show. Keep it up. Thanks, Connor. I do want to say that plugging 12 Pentium 4 computers into your house and leaving them on running 24/7, whether it's, no matter how you manage to cluster them or make them behave as one computer, I don't think Handbrake does clusters. Most of the video transcoding software that's designed to operate at a cluster that isn't very high-end is incredibly inefficient. For example, the stuff that's built into QuickTime, or I want to say the previous version of there's a application I spent every day of my life in, Final Cut Pro. Some of the stuff around Final Cut Pro, that it sounds so amazing because it's going to allow you to distribute the computing for the rendering across, it doesn't work.
Right.
A folding farm essentially would be a collection of computers that are running 24/7 to work on something like, don't you love those moments when you have an image open and you close it, folding at home, folding.stanford.edu, where they're doing distributed computing in this really amazing way across millions of users all over the world. And what you're doing is, while the computers are running, they download a chunk of data from the mothership. They process that data, they upload it back up to the mothership, and that is all integrated into these huge, sophisticated research. I'm going to call them campaigns because they're like military campaigns. Protein folding is the primary one from folding at home. So that would be really cool. You basically you can join a team that's existing. You can start your own team. I want to warn you though, if you run these Pentium 4 computers 24/7 doing this folding, you will jack up your electrical bill. So if you are paying the electrical bill, that's okay. If you happen to be like on your parents' electrical bill, you might want to give them a warning. Also, you can, extension cord your way into blowing out with a whole bunch of P4s. They suck down a lot of juice, and you can, melt your circuit breakers. You could teach yourself Linux. You could learn how to set up a smooth wall or an IP cop router. If you want to see something kind of silly in terms of a really fun sort of cluster computing, somebody built a Linux cluster into an IKEA cabinet, not using Pentium 4 boxes, but I think I put the limb in there, helmer.sfe.se. Helmer was built to last a month or two, and has lasted far beyond the original plan. So this guy did this crazy, basically bought a cabinet from IKEA and stuffed all of these blade servers inside of it, if I'm getting it correctly, and then started rendering with it. Take
a look at the, if you didn't hear last week's episode, go back and listen to it, go back and find a video of it, go find the article on PC-Per that looks at power consumption for Bitcoin mining, and know that it's going to be very comparable in terms of how much this can actually cost you in a year. It's not free. Electric is not free, especially in today's world. And when you're talking about inefficient computing platforms, I kind of hate to word it that way because it sounds so negative. But if you're looking at Pentium 4 2.8 gigahertz, those were the hottest processors ever. Those are the only ones. Those are the ones where my wife had a system built on that, and I said we've got to get rid of that because it's making my house too hot. Right? I mean, those are serious concerns. And if you have several of those, you're trying to merge together. Unless you have absolutely free electric, maybe you live on the Hoover Dam. You don't have to worry. You can use that water for cooling as well. Those are, I hate to say throw things away or stop using them completely, but there has to be a point, right?
Yeah, if you do decide that you don't have anything you want to do with them, Connor, do me a favor, make sure they are properly recycled. There are a lot of agencies now that will recycle electronics for free. There are a lot of places you can donate computers to where they have some interesting stuff they can do with it. Do me a favor, everybody listening in the Twitch audience, keep computer parts and electronics out of landfills. Make sure they are properly recycled.
Yes.
And Connor, have fun. Just watch out that you don't blow your electric bill through the roof. I also want to say howdy to Philip and the whole crew at Reddit who posted us, linked to us at reddit.com/r/buildapc/ we actually are on the top page for that section. Does anyone else watch these guys? It's like an NPR show for geeks. And that's one of the nicest things anybody's ever said to me, that I was NPR quality. So
NPR quality.
Hello, Reddit. Do us a favor. Tell all your friends. Get us on the home Reddit page, because
there you go.
That would freak Leo out. We are going to get Ryan out of his office before he melts down. I can sense the heat radiating off the steel wall behind him. So We're going to call it until next week. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
That's it for this week in computer hardware.